Good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome everyone to the session on financing, private sector participation, and stakeholder engagement in the Asia Water Forum. My name is Lê Lan. I'm an environmental economist at the Asian Development Bank, and I will be the moderator for this interesting session today. It is now widely recognized that lack of finance is impeding the progress of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 6, related to clean water availability and sanitation for all. The most recent data suggests that the current annual rate of progress needs to be doubled to achieve the target by 2030, and a large amount of investment is required. Climate change exacerbates the situation by increasing water scarcity and damaging water infrastructure with more frequent and severe natural disasters. Government financing alone is clearly not enough, and there is an urgent need of engaging private financing in the water sector. Private sector can play an important role in tapping an additional source of finance for infrastructure investment in water supply, sanitation, and irrigation. However, despite of government's effort of leveraging private sector investment, the percentage of private sector participation in the water sector is relatively low. So the key question in our sessions today is how we can build better partnerships to mobilize, finance, and sustain efforts for water security and resilience. In today's sessions, we will explore and discuss some innovative ways to better engage private sector and other stakeholders in water management. I'd like to thank the Young Water Professional reporter Ranak Shweta, Youth Engagement Junior Professional, Global Water Partnership for reporting on this session. So before starting the session, I'd like to remind our audience that there is a Q&A chat box on the right-hand side of the webpage, and you are all welcome to type any question in the chat box to our speakers, and we will come back to them in the discussion session. Now, let me introduce the first speaker, Mr. Martin Scholler from Arab. Mr. Martin's presentation today will focus on partnership for building water resilience. Mr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Schuler, and I work at the international engineering consultancy Arab. I'm based in London, where I lead the London Water team. And today I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share some of our work with cities across the globe, helping to build urban water resilience using an approach called the City Water Resilience Approach. It's clear that we live in challenging times with multiple stresses on our water systems. A changing climate coupled with rapid urbanization has resulted in unpredictable rainfall, flooding, droughts, and other water-related shocks and stresses. Asia and Pacific is one of the fastest growing regions of the world. However, almost 500 million people in the region do not have access to basic water supplies, and over 1 billion lack access to basic sanitation. Add to this the fact that the demand for water is growing across agriculture, domestic and industrial sectors, really shines a spotlight on the need for building urban water resilience. Across the world, decision makers have focused on the central role that water plays in the city of lives. The City Water Resilience Approach responds to that need. The CWRA was developed by Arab, the Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI, the Resilient Cities Network, and has had support from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Resilient Shift, and has been developed to address key water challenges and help build urban water resilience. The CWRA takes a holistic, systems-based approach to resilience, and the methodology is both inclusive and transparent, helping to build trust and consensus amongst the partnerships required to build urban water resilience. We've been working in cities with partners across the global north and the global south, from Miami to Cape Town, in order to build urban water resilience. Each city has a unique set of challenges with differing systems of governance, which mean that interventions will need to be bespoke, as there's no one size fits all. The CWRA provides an end-to-end process from diagnosing water challenges the city and its basin faces through to developing and implementing an action plan to strengthen resilience. It's all around implementing those required actions. It offers a range of tools and techniques, such as the online digital tool, Our Water. Our Water provides a range of attributes that allow stakeholders who are responsible or those who are affected by the water system to visualize how they can work together. It also highlights overlaps and underlaps in the roles and responsibilities of those who are responsible for our water systems. The city water resilience approach starts by engaging stakeholders and understanding the underlying water basin and how it's comprised, baselining urban water resilience. Then we move on to understanding how water is being used and how the city can withstand and endure challenges such as drought, sudden flooding, and how could it grow and develop as an economic system, and how water can assist that. The resilience baseline is developed using the City Water Resilience Framework, and this is made up of 4 key dimensions of water resilience: leadership and strategy, planning and finance, infrastructure and ecosystems, and health and well-being. And together they collectively form a picture of the resilience of the water systems of a city. Each of these dimensions have a series of goals and sub-goals, which really help a city to understand where it sits in terms of its water resilience journey. So I've just picked out a few highlights of our work to date and how some of the cities that we've worked with are dealing with some of the water challenges. For example, Amman in Jordan is suffering from the twin challenges of flash flooding and water scarcity. And water is seen as one of the key challenges to economic growth. Demand for water has increased rapidly, with Jordan taking on increasing waves of refugees. It is meeting these challenges by a combination of tools and techniques, reusing water, and looking at cooperation with neighboring countries in order to help meet its increasing water scarcity challenges. Another city, Kingston upon Hull in the UK, has a different set of challenges. It is subject to intense storms and tidal surges. The city has taken a multi-agency approach, directly involving the community and implementing local solutions to enhance preparedness, response and recovery from flooding instances. And we've been helping to shape that response. Another city we've been working with, Mexico City, has overexploited its groundwater aquifer, and the city's continuing to rapidly grow. So as well as developing new water resources, the city is implementing innovative approaches such as rainwater harvesting and implementing blue-green infrastructure, which is together helping to build the city's resilience. Similar to Hull, Greater Miami's coastal location makes it highly vulnerable to tidal flooding. And it's now responding to this challenge by delivering a strategy of living with water, creating more spaces for flooding, and looking at elevating roads and homes. And finally, one last city that we've looked at is Cape Town in South Africa. During the recent droughts in 2018, the city responded to the so-called Day Zero event by accelerating how it communicates with its citizens, looking at ways to share the burden, looking at ways of reducing consumption, looking at ways to postpone the day that taps would run dry. So by working on a complex but simple communication package, it managed to postpone the day when taps would run dry. I'd like to also just highlight actually the benefit of working across cities. And it's really important to learn and share experiences for building urban water resilience. The CWRA forms an ecosystem of good practice experience. All our work is published and available online, from the initial baseline, so-called city characterization reports, through to the implementation pathways. So cities can learn from each other. So by bringing together cities who've been involved in the city water resilience approach, has provided an opportunity for peer-to-peer learning. For example, Miami was keen to learn experiences from Cape Town on the so-called Day Zero event on ways to better communicate risks to their citizens. Although those risks around flooding, those innovative communication methods have been reviewed and lessons learned from that. So partnerships within and between cities are important, and sharing and learning together is important for building urban water resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Very interesting presentation and interesting approach to engage multiple stakeholders in building water resilience that is applicable to many different cities. And I can see that the global exchange knowledge platform is very useful. So now let's move on to our next speaker, Dr. Iskandar Abdul Laif, Deputy Director of Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation CAREC Institute. Dr. Abdul Laif holds a master and PhD degrees from Tashkent Institute of Irrigation and Agriculture Mechanization Engineers, Uzbekistan. He has over 25 years experience in water management, water institutions, environmental activities in Afghanistan and 5 Central Asian countries. He joined CAREC Institute as Deputy Director in June 2019. From 2013 to 2019, he worked as Executive Director of Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia. He worked as Regional Advisor for Germany Berlin Initiative, Transboundary Water Management in Central Asia at the GIZ. During 2007 to 2009, he was a Senior Researcher at ZEF Center for Development Research, University of Bonn, and conducted research in Central Asia and Afghanistan. During 2001 and 2007, he worked as a regional researcher at International Water Management Institute. He is a member of IWRA and editorial boards of internationally peer-reviewed journals. He is the author of 3 monographic books, peer-reviewed over 30 articles, policy papers, and presented more than 150 conference papers. Today's presentation of Dr. Abdul Laif focuses on water infrastructure in Central Asia, building capacities and policies to promote sustainable financing and private participation. Dr. Abdul Laif, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for a very detailed presentation of me. We all know that Central Asia are very well known about the water problems, which are mainly about sharing water, which are transboundary. But currently, we are also facing serious issues with outdated and old water infrastructure. Let's try to understand situation, what can be done, and how private participation can improve the financing of the infrastructure building in Central Asia. Next slide, please. And if we look at the water, actually, as I mentioned in the beginning, is key driver. Any sector in Central Asia which will develop depends the availability of water. Water, of course, limited resource. It's also access to water is key for all countries sharing water from two rivers, which are Amu Darya and Sir Darya, are important for their economic development, social and political development. However, as we mentioned many times, the problems of water is becoming more clear when you see that if business as usual scenario will develop, these countries face much more pressure on their economic development, on their social development, and also political situation. So total water resources is not big, it's around 120 cubic kilometers. 90% of this water comes from two rivers, which are bigger ones. And recently, due to climate change, shortages are increasing, and it's equaling currently 8 to 10%, but projections by 2030, it can go even further, 20% of water shortages. And also, other thing is dynamics of demography in the region. Population is growing. And if we had a per capita water availability in the beginning of 60s of last century, it was around 5 to 6,000 cubic meters, and average 2,500. Currently, we have even countries with around 1,400 cubic meters per capita per annum, which is very close to UN water shortage indicator. And therefore, I think delivery of water services and also access to water becomes an important issue. On the other hand, you have to have a very, very sustained infrastructure and water systems in order to deliver these services. Next slide, please. Keeping all this in mind and giving you a little bit more explanation about water use, mostly water in Central Asia used in agriculture. It's from 60 to 90% of water which is used are by agriculture. If you compare is with EU 28, around 40%, 45% is used in agriculture. So it's very water dependent agriculture in this region. Rest of the sectors use from 20 to 5%. Industries use less water, the same for municipalities. And the biggest water user in this region is Uzbekistan, with highest population, of course. And then you have countries like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan using almost equal number of water, around 20 cubic kilometers. If you see the per capita water use, it's very different. And you see the lowest in Kazakhstan, around 1,300 cubic meters, and the highest in Turkmenistan, almost 6,000 cubic meters. So it's very, very diverse water per use per capita. If you compare with, again, European countries, you will see almost 10 times more water consumption in this region. So this is a background and rationale. If we go further, next slide, please, and we will understand that the region is having some issues with infrastructure development. Almost all water infrastructure in this region have been built during Soviet times, 70s and 80s of last century. And infrastructure development requires 5 to 7% of GDP. And infrastructure investment actually limits economic growth here. And there is also one other problem is the higher public debt levels. It's equaling almost higher than 40% of GDP in average. So there is investment hunger, but also some limitations. If we look the major areas for infrastructure so far is transport, power generation got the largest share of infrastructure investment. Water and sanitation very low, like 6%. So infrastructure investment needs are emerging due to outdated infrastructure, need for rehabilitation of existing ones, but also due to population growth and development, new infrastructure is also in need. Next slide, please. If we see that the water sector's financing situation currently, it's mostly operated and also funded by state. So it's like a continuation of the Soviet times. Some reforms have happened, but still lion's share comes from state budget. And on the other hand, due to restructuring and economic reforms last 30 years, there is actually state is not able to fully fund infrastructure, human transport needs of the sector. So you have still some gaps in financing. Due to delayed investment, again, the other problem emerged is that infrastructure becoming inadequate. So you are not well maintaining the system. And also shrinking in financing leads that operation and maintenance is not delivered on time in full scale. So the current investigation by Carnegie Institute shows that if all investment needs, new infrastructure and rehabilitation is covered, only for water sector you need almost 40 billion US dollars annual, means almost 8 to 10% of GDP. That's impossible to finance by the state funding. And next, please. And on top of it, we have also issues that this deteriorating infrastructure will lead to problems in transboundary level. And on the other hand, we face that this 30 years experience, although there is institutions existing and countries are trying to do their best, there is limited cooperation in this transboundary level, which also limits the international financing of this transboundary water infrastructure. That's also very important to notice. Most of the infrastructure investment were at least delayed until 2016, when Uzbekistan has changed its policies towards cooperation in the region. Next slide, please. And if we calculate how much this limited cooperation is costing, is around 4.5 billion per annum. Total investment, potential investment is upheld because of this limited cooperation. Things are of course changing, it's improving since 2016. Countries trying to build trust, but still I think limited cooperation is costing to the region huge amount of money. Next please, slide. And if we see that an analysis of funding, we see that we can see that private investments role is almost zero, and 25 billion is required to upgrade water infrastructure in Central Asia. And state budget, by the way, covers only from 40 to 60% or 69% of the cost. Means you have still up to 30% of deficit of financing in water sector. Please next. And if we come close to the some major issues related to this, is that one focus area could be agriculture and land and water reforms, which is unfinished business. That is one reason why financing is limited from the private funds. Second, I think agriculture, which consumes most of the water, is highly regulated, and the production system and land ownership is not clear. And also we have to understand these countries that they took role of social stabilizator, means the governments are taking care of providing food, water security to the population, and they will continue playing a very, very still big share of financing will come from the government. But downside of this all tightly regulated system is reduced incentives for private financing the sector, especially the infrastructure financing. Next, please. And we developed some policy recommendations, which I can disclose, is that there is reforms ongoing. As I said, land and water sector is still under reforms. So what could be done is that the producing of the new laws and regulations should lead public-private partner schemes, especially in irrigated agriculture. So water delivery and operation maintenance could be also delegated partly to the private companies. That itself can trigger incentives to use water-saving technologies and reducing water consumption in the sector. And then, of course, the important is that political commitment and also updated legislation should give a guarantee at the policy level for private sector players to invest into infrastructure, invest to the water sector. I think without the stable investment climate and business opportunities, it's very hard to imagine the private sector will be coming to the water sector. They're investing to other sectors which are open, like a trade and roads, but not in the agriculture. And then third one, maybe most important, I think it's also clear for everyone that improving governance and efficiency of the management in this system is very important, because it's important to understand that you have to make sure that every dollar invested is counted, and also it's should create the creditworthiness of the water sector. Without such a improved governance and efficiency, investments will be staying outside of the sector. And the last but not least, I think, is expertise. States should learn how to regulate, and business should learn how to invest. And this should also provide necessary financial, legal, and technical skills, both the staff working in the sector, but also managers who are managing the sector. Next, please. And I think reforms of agriculture policies are also important. It should lead to open market-oriented, deregulated agriculture sector, which is also helps then improve water services. And the other thing is that the multi-purpose water schemes are very important, because there is also possibility to give concessions of infrastructure and land around the irrigation systems. It could be also led to renting out facilities to the private users, which will also bring more finance to water sector. And the regional level and transboundary level, there could be water energy consortium type of arrangements, which could lead to joint financing and operation of transboundary infrastructure. And countries also bet not the sharing of the water, but sharing of the benefits of water. Maybe it's obvious, but I think this is one good thing to read. And the last but not least, I think economic framework to promote cooperation and integrated planning among sectors. This is the other condition to increase the private participation, investment, improved investment infrastructure, and also environment in the water sector. These are the policy recommendations which I would like to share with you. I'm sure there will be more comments. I will stay ready to respond to questions. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's a great overview of water situation in Central Asia countries. And we can see that there are many challenges as well as potential opportunities for private sector to engage in the water sector. So now our next speaker is Ms. Jigisha Saiswan. Ms. Jigisha is an engineer planner with more than 6 years of experience in the wash sector. She is a senior research associate at the Center for Water and Sanitation, CEPT University in India. She supports urban sanitation-related activities at the state level and city level. She has worked on projects focusing on sustainable urban water management and water security. She also works on state government and local government level finance. She is a civil engineer and has done her postgraduate in urban planning from CPT University. Today, Ms. Jigisha is going to talk about moving cities toward urban water security. Ms. Jigisha, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lian. Good morning, everybody. Today, I think we'll discuss a big partnership between the local government, the local development sector partners, as well as the local community who have taken steps for moving towards moving a city towards urban water security. Since the past 2 days, we've been discussing the extreme urgency and the need to take steps towards water security. Though we see so many cities today facing the day zero scenario, today I'd like to discuss a case of a city called Bhuj in Gujarat, in the Western India, which had survived an arid climate for centuries. So the approach which the city had taken in the history was interlinking of catchments and lakes and building partnerships with the local community. So then they did not have complaints for water. The strongest part of this management was the community management, which was taken up, and the entire catchment was well managed, and the activities of desilting, cleaning of the lakes, and cleaning of the catchment channels was done regularly with involvement of the citizens. Though like any other modern city, it it forgot the importance of its own local water resources and started going far and away for water, for in the search of water. The urban water catchment was ignored with encroachment and construction on the lake areas. That led to collapse of the interlinked catchment systems and less water flowing in the lakes, which dried up many lakes. There was so from 66 lakes which were there, which were existing earlier, there are only 30 lakes today which are existing and visible. So with this, also the groundwater level of the area fell down rigorously. So, seeing such an adverse condition in the city, a local NGO called Arid Communities in Technology, they took initiatives towards water security in the city Bhuj. It focused on all the aspects and took an integrated approach. It initiated its work by conducting an in-depth technical study and understanding the local hydrogeology of the area. It included understanding the surface water as well as the groundwater, of the area. Along with the technical studies, it also focused majorly on community mobilization. The intervention with all the interventions with the which the local NGO took had participation of the community in each and every project. And based on the study and the local project demonstrations, it advocated local government and brought convergence with the existing national programs, which helped them to implement these projects quickly on ground and see the results and see the positive results. For example, hydrogeology was included in its land use planning itself. Generally, we have seen negligence of hydrogeology in any land use plan which is developed for a city. Similarly, institutional framework was proposed where all the government institutions working on water or any water related sector were made to communicate with each other and not work in silos. So this was a big partnership which was seen between the local NGO, the community to come up with the projects and demonstrations, as well as the support of the local government to take and implement this project on ground. Alternative water supply systems were taken up, and it was made sure that all the projects are implemented with the help of participations of the citizens. Revival of the local and traditional sources was done by repairing the traditional lake catchment systems which were developed by the old rulers. For this, even a lot of historical studies, studies were taken up to understand the earlier existing catchment systems. Desilting of lakes as well as cleaning of the lakes was taken. These activities were taken up, but not alone by the local government, but with the inclusion of the public, so that later on they are well aware of these activities and can be done regularly. Even revival of old unused well was done for decentralized supply of water for vulnerable areas of the city. Another aspect which was covered under this was rainwater harvesting. Rainwater harvesting was divided in two aspects, where one was rainwater harvesting structures at schools, so that from childhood only the kids are aware of the concept and take up these activities further. And the other aspect was rainwater harvesting structures at household levels. So here in the city and the state, the guidelines for rainwater harvesting have also been in the policies, where the rainwater harvesting structures are mandatory for to pass the building plan. So this has the potential for also involving the private participation and also leverage and incentivize them to to build up and support the households in building up the harvesting structures. Along with this, even groundwater recharge structures were built across the city. Considering the hydrogeology of the city, as well as detailed study was done where to identify the low-lying areas, and the groundwater recharge wells were built. Also, along with that, regular monitoring of this groundwater is being conducted. One good example of the city was one colony which was facing an adverse effect of urban floods. They converted this into an opportunity and inspected the area and identified the low-lying area, where the flooding area was then converted into recharge structure. So all the flooded water which was getting accumulated in one particular area, that got converted into a groundwater recharge facility. So based on all this approach, now we feel the need to move from the conventional approach, which was only the supply, considering only the supply side management. Instead of that, we should move towards supply side and also look at the demand side management. Instead of planning just at the city scale, the planning to achieve urban water security, there's a need to plan at the watershed scale and also make basin connected cities. We need to try treating the water cycle as one unit with regenerative water services. Based on this approach, the Center for Water and Sanitation has come based on this approach, as well as the case of Bhuj, as well as the existing toolkits which are present to support urban water security. The Center for Water and Sanitation has come up with the Urban Water Security Toolkit, which is divided in 5 modules. Though the first initial question which the security toolkit asks is that is your city water secure? There are n number of questions which are placed in this, which are very basic questions, which can be asked to the citizens as well as to the local government, where with these questions the citizens can identify the gaps, as well as the local government can identify the stakeholders which they can engage to take up various projects and implement to move towards water security. Now I'll go through one by one through each module, and now I'll go one by one through each module. The first module being urban water supply system assessment. So here the module takes a holistic approach by analyzing the service providers, that is the local government, users perspective, that is the citizens end, and also analyzes the private water suppliers. Because now, particularly in the case of India, we see that not only the water is supplied not only through the local government, but people are also dependent on the private water supply through water tankers and all. So an holistic approach is taken to understand what is the water supply system in the whole city. And based on this, the present water demand as well as the future water demand can be calculated based on the tools which are available in the toolkit. Based on this assessment, the key issues and the strategies are identified. Further, this becomes the infrastructure side, which the module 1 covers. Module 2 covers understanding the urban water resources. So as I mentioned earlier, it is not only important to just see the infrastructure side for a city. It is also very important to understand the urban water resources on which the city is dependent. So this module helps to assess the hydrogeological characteristics and water resources. And in the end, it helps to develop a water balance assessment. So in this, it captures the rainfall and its potential in the city, the watershed and the surface water assessment, the whole aquifer and groundwater assessment, and document and understanding history of the management. So here in this module, we also focus on the history of water management, as we've seen that there are a lot of cities which have survived droughts over a long period through various water security measures. So learning from the history is always a lesson which should be taken ahead. Along with this, watershed study. So how to conduct the watershed study in the new area or in the new city. All these aspects are also covered under this module. Further, based on the module 1 of supply systems as well as the module 2 on urban water resources, module 3 is developed where the city is guided to explore new opportunities for water security planning. So this is divided in two parts, where one part focuses on the alternate urban water supply and the second part focuses on increasing efficiency of already existing water systems. So first part where it talks about the alternative water supply system, various approaches are underlined under this, where we're talking about the rainwater harvesting systems, the revival of the existing local water resources, so that the city does not have to keep on looking for water from far away and invest in huge capex for laying of pipelines. And the third aspect is of groundwater recharge, where we see the cities are now drilling down and down to go for to fetch groundwater, but there are very few areas or very few cities which focus on even recharging of the groundwater structures. And the end aspect is on the wastewater reuse part. The second sub aspect of this module is increasing efficiency of existing water systems. So not only does this toolkit talk about just creating new and new infrastructure, but it also asks to increase the efficiency of existing water system. So by reducing non-revenue water, there are approaches which are mentioned which the cities can take up to reduce the non-revenue water. Then pricing as a tool for water demand management. So a lot of times we have observed, for example, in the case of Bhuj also, in the case of Bhuj city, which I have been explaining earlier, they are dependent on the city of Narmada, on the river of Narmada, which is very far away, 400-500 kilometers from the city. So the investment which is done in that is not covered by the taxes or the water charges which the citizens pay. So the pricing tool is also in the module, which helps the city to identify and manage the tariff of water accordingly. For all these three modules, there are two later modules of how the citizens can be involved and how the institutional and regulatory framework can be taken up to implement the above three modules. So this module talks about identifying the gaps and overlaps in the existing framework and strengthening the framework by coordination and facilitation amongst the existing institutions which are already there. Based on this, there's an option of also creating a learning alliance as well as developing platforms where various departments of the government as well as private organizations can communicate and not work in silo. For the citizens' involvement, there have been various tools which are prepared for awareness generation and information, creating a citizens forum, like developing lake conservation committees or rainwater harvesting monitoring committees, which can help raising awareness as well as also involving the citizens in these activities. So the main key features of this toolkit is that it's made in such a way that it makes city self-reliant for water and being with conservation of local water resources rather than depending on distant sources. This toolkit can be used for various n number of stakeholders, may it be the local government, a development partner who's working on a particular project and wants to go through, a citizen who wants to assess whether his city is doing well or not. So it can be adapted and tailored according to the context and need of each city. Further, I'll be happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jikisha. Great presentation, very interesting, and comprehensive toolkits that show the effectiveness of integrated approach required multiple stakeholders engagement including the demand and supply side for the urban water planning and management. For the audience, again, I would like to remind that there is a Q&A chat box in the webpage, and if you have any question for our speakers, please type in the chat box and we will come back to them later. So our last speakers, I would like to call on Mr. Chris Fisher, Ms. Muhil Nesi, and Ms. Netia from Water Science Policy. Their presentation is entitled Arteris Blue, a digital story of the Mekong River. Mr. Chris Fisher is a project management, knowledge and data professional with a background in economics, biology, and natural and water resource management. He is the co-founder, CEO, and executive editor at the Water Science Policy, where he coordinates around 50 volunteers and leads the development efforts of the platform to advance inclusive, innovative, and inspiring communication around water, sanitation, and the environment. Ms. Muhil Nesi is an urban researcher and architect based in India. She works part-time with Water Science Policy as an editor and writer. She is also a researcher at the Center for Social and Environmental Innovation, a think tank based in Bangalore. Prior to becoming a researcher, her work in architecture focused on water-sensitive building design and landscape planning. And our last speaker, Ms. Nesi, is a solutions-driven researcher and urban development specialist with a background in environmental studies and a commitment to water issues. She holds an MSc in urban land governance with a thesis on urban waterfront regeneration from IHS Erasmus University Rotterdam. She leads the data design, illustration, and conceptualization work at Water Science Policy and have led the graphic storytelling on water supply, sanitation, gender issues, and water resource management for projects with UNESCO Water Assessment Program, 360 Info, the Water Integrity Network, and the Stockholm International Water Institute. So, yes, the floor is yours, please.
Thank
Hi,
you,
everyone. Sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Go for it. Moira was just saying thank you.
Thank you. Today, my colleagues Chris, Sanya, and I, we'll be presenting to you the Mekong River Project. It's the first of our series of river journeys from around the world, from the Arteris Blue series that we've launched at Water Science Policy. The aim of this series is to build awareness among different kinds of stakeholders and to build an understanding of river basins. It's important to design tools that communicate challenges and solutions that create interest and collaboration between different actors and potentially attract further investment to achieve integrated water resources management. We want to show to our readers that basins are more than just about rivers, but they're a series of interconnected landscapes. And our pilot, the Mekong River, it starts in Tibet and flows through 5 different countries. And it links a wide range of wetlands as well as terrestrial ecosystems. We think that this website could serve as an educational tool and can help people understand the Mekong Basin through 4 key topics: biodiversity, livelihoods, energy, and climate change as the final and cross-cutting issue. And our broader aim has been to bridge what we see as an important gap in stories around water, as well as the environment in general. To start with, quantitative data is often available only in formats and venues that people generally can't access or understand, whereas information that is accessible through art and media, for example, tends to have a more qualitative focus. So we built this website to include stories from photographers, journalists, as well as academics, and we've supported these stories through spatial data as well as quantitative data that has been presented through lots of animations and in formats that anyone can easily understand. This, for example, is a story about habitat fragmentation in the Yunnan province. And we've found a story about elephants, and we gathered information on how their migration patterns are changing. And this is to explain to readers how much climate change is impacting even very large mammals, even in areas that seem pristine.
And you can discover a lot of the amazing biodiversity as well on the platform that a lot of people don't know about. And it's what a lot of our efforts are in the development space are also about, to protect this biodiversity, because a lot of livelihoods depend on it, whether that is for ecotourism or for the giant freshwater fisheries, which you'll also see in a moment. The Mekong is actually the most biodiversity dense river ecosystem on the world, if you take it relative to its area. It's more biodiverse by square kilometer than the Amazon, for example, or any other river basin. And you see some of the amazing stories of resilience as well that happen in the Mekong. These are fishermen along the Mekong River in Laos that are doing a really treacherous task, and they have lived along the river for many thousand years almost, always in neighborhood to the Irrawaddy river dolphin, for example, one of the really emblematic species of the area. And you see here how new developments such as this hydropower plant has directly impacted the Irrawaddy river dolphin's habitat. As a matter of fact, here what you see south of the plant used to be a Irrawaddy dolphin habitat, and actually since we did this website, the dolphins in this area have disappeared. And it's all about telling these kind of stories to create better development in a way, because Southeast Asia is one of the regions where we see the most massive land use change. This here is a perfect example of a 25-year period. You have basically complete deforestation. You have a reservoir that clogs up the river. You see the color of the river change, even, which has impacts on downstream fisheries in the delta as well, and also saltwater intrusion there. And there's just a lot of stories that are really worth telling, because without raising that awareness and that interest, there is no further financing to improve the development and the policies. It's really important, we believe, to tell these stories and to tell them in a very accessible way that everyone can use, and also then go in and read further if they're interested in a particular topic.
ធ្វើផ្ទះខ្ពស់យើងប្រុសយើងវាអត់មានដូចថាក្បូនអីហ្នឹងណាវាក្ររស័យក្រភុយធ្វើក្បូនទៅបានទីលើខ្ពស់ខ្ពស់មក
On Arteries.blue, there's many of these little stories, many little videos and photos that we sourced in collaboration with local photojournalists and videographers. And yeah, we invite you to go to Arteries.blue and discover all these little hidden secrets that the Mekong harbors, and that we've tried to collect a little bit, at least, on this website. Even people that have worked on the Mekong for many years will very likely find something new there. This here is a story from a Canadian photographer that documented the displacement of an indigenous community following a dam construction there. And the Mekong is really, for us, also this melting pot where a lot of the seemingly competing targets of development and environmental protection collide. And sometimes we're able to turn these into synergistic targets. Often one side loses out over the other. And this also has a lot of impacts on traditional livelihoods. The Mekong supports the world's biggest freshwater fisheries. And that's deeply linked to the culture, not only of the indigenous people, but essentially to all of the countries, in particular Cambodia. One result is also that because there's such a rich fishery, we have a lot of flyways. The ADB folks will know very well that the Regional Flyway Initiative has a big presence there. And it's very, very incredible to look at all the biodiversity there and really dig into the reports that we featured.
Then lastly, we moved to the downstream area, to the lower Mekong Basin, and we cover lots of local stories, again from fishermen, and yeah, we have amazing satellite imageries from the sound is a bit faster. យូរឃើញតែម្ដងទេឥឡូវអត់ឃើញទេឥឡូវខ្លាចជាជាង10គីឡូ20គីឡូដល់វិញទេអត់លើទៀតគេឃើញយូរគេមិនលែងចោលក៏ទុកទេគេខ្លាចណាគេអត់យកមកទេគេលែងចោល So yeah, many video shots covering like very particular issues in the areas and local issues. This was about fishermen and how the overflowing river affects their catch, and so the flood pulse in the delta actually affects a lot the economies and livelihoods and culture of the local people. And we can see these incredible developments again. Yeah, surprisingly, we found a lot of these fascinating shots, like satellite imagery. And we all found it as a very easy tool to show people very explicitly what kind of this development is happening. Also a huge issue is plastic pollution, of course, that again with the reversed overflowing brings all the plastic pollution down to the Tonle Sap Lake. And yeah, all of this information is actually not so easy to gather, and then to put it all together was really a big challenge. it's like bits and pieces. The sand mining issue, again, that just ruins the local ecosystems, and as a result causes certain chain of events in agriculture and soil salinization in the area. In fact, this delta area is sinking in a quite impressive rates. It's almost up to 2.5 centimeters per year. So yeah, after covering all the facts and stories, we go back to the traditions and finish all the story with the 9 dragons legend. Dragons that are particularly famous in this area for their power to change the world and influence our lives. Yeah, so such a long, endless story of the One River. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, I think over to Lan. That's the presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the very nice interactive maps. You can see like comprehensive information about the climate change and along the river from upstream to downstream will be captured in the map. So yeah, I guess that's the end of our presentation, and we can now move to the Q&A session. And I see some questions coming up in the chat box. So the first question to Iskandar. The question is, what are the attractive policy incentives for private financiers for investment in public water supply infrastructure? Iskandar, please, over to you.
Thank you. Good question. I think if we are talking about public water supply, it's much easier to attract financing, and there are good examples in Central Asia. For example, we have city supply, water supply systems which are privatized in private hands. For example, in Kazakhstan, total city like the one is in Shymkent, which is south of Kazakhstan. And recently, Tashkent city have signed the agreement with French company to also not privatize, but at least privatize the service for 20 years on water supply in Tashkent city. So there are many examples. So mainly what attracting this water supply, public water supply systems is there are more easier regulations than in irrigated agriculture. So my point was that in public water system, it's much easier, advanced public investment already ongoing. Mainly is related on tariffs and service payments are maybe only issue, but most of the cases the solutions are found. That's my feedback. But in country in irrigated agriculture, it's very difficult. It's more of access to common pool resources. It limits investments. That was my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Iskandar. Our next question is to Ms. Jigisha. I'm curious about groundwater recharge structures, how successful they are. Secondly, how do you ensure that groundwater does not get polluted through these recharge structures?
Yeah, okay. Thanks. This is an interesting question. First, I'd like to address of how the groundwater recharge structures were implemented in that particular case. Like a detailed hydrogeological study and technical study was carried out in the background, and the particular areas were identified where the recharge structures can be built. So based on the recharge structures were backed by in-depth study. I think the second question was on how do we ensure that these do not get They do not pollute the groundwater. So one of the things which I discussed in my presentation was also on the monitoring aspect, which is being captured across the city for these groundwater recharge structure. So one build is on the monitoring of these structures should be rigorous and should be continuous. Then there was about the community committees which are also set up to monitor these structures and to take care and regularly maintain these structures. So these are various approaches which are taken and can be adopted in various cities to maintain the quality of water also, and to monitor the quality of water also, which goes to the groundwater.
Thank you, Chikisha. Our next question is to Mr. Scholler. A few years ago, IRA published Cities Alive, which show how human-centered approach can make cities more livable. Can you describe how human-centered design can be applied to water planning and management?
That's a really good question. Our work with the city water resilience approach really puts the citizen in the middle of urban water resilience. So when we look to describe the systems, it's not just the engineering systems, but it's the socio-technical systems. So bringing in the citizen and other user groups into that conversation from the very beginning to understand their understanding of their water systems, but also how they want to see that develop. So we're able to capture that through our process and then bring that into the solutioneering and intervention stages. So bringing citizens, representatives and groups through that process provides that transparency with the regulators and those who are responsible for water systems. But it's really key to unlocking some of those opportunities. We all have to live in these cities, and it's reasonable, I believe, that that citizens need to be part of that process. And so living with water, understanding urban water resilience, but also how the citizens can respond to particular shocks and stresses, bringing them into that conversation early, like in the case of Cape Town, provides solutions when things, unexpected events occur, like extended drought periods. Citizens are better able then to respond to those needs. So it's really important to bring citizens through that journey in that very inclusive and transparent way that the city water resilience approach takes. So thank you for that great question.
Thank you, Martin. We have another question for the water science policy team. Thank you so much for your great effort. Can you please share why you named this website Ateris? And is it helpful to have the website in the Mekong local language?
Yeah, good question. So we named it arteries.blue because we perceive rivers as kind of the arteries of the planet and of nature and of society that connect a lot of things, and without which we can't live in a way, or many ecosystems can't survive, hence the name arteries. And blue also because we're trying to link those arteries to the blue economy or to the oceans. So there's a bit of a big dependency from the downstream or coastal resilience kind of space on those arteries. And yeah, we were very keen to do it actually in local languages, but we didn't have any funding to do that. So we would be delighted to realize this also, maybe even for specific tributaries of the Mekong in the regional and local languages, whether that is Khmer or Vietnamese or Chinese.
Okay, Chris. So we have another question, this one for the whole panel. There is clear intent from ADB and other donors to fill the commercial viability gap to attract private sector capital. However, what I hope to learn is how this financing is assessed. to grants, procurement processes, subsidized service contracts via water utilities, etc. How do we action this financing so we can start deploying solutions which are needed urgently? So this question is to the whole panel. Who wants to give an answer?
I'd like to make a start, if I may. Maybe just stepping back a little bit, and in the 15 cities that we've worked with, we see a common trend or underpinning in terms of some of the routes to problem routes, which includes, creating those really strong collaboration and partnerships and cooperation, but equally about having sharing data and technical knowledge. So it's really important to understand where everybody has a common understanding about the water systems and how they need to be developed further to build resilience. And then you can sort of layer on sort of leadership and finance. So it's important to have the governance systems in place, but also to understand things like how can you recover that cost? How do you share equitably some of those costs within the system? So it's a really complex question which requires many facets, but it really needs to bring along not just the leaders of a city and the finances of these interventions and solutions, but bringing the citizens' voice into that, because effectively they've got to live with some of these solutions and they need to be part of that particular solution suite. So I think I haven't quite answered the question there, but I want to bring in another dimension to that particular question.
Thank you, Martin. Anyone want to add on, or anyone who wants to share some insight?
Maybe if I can. First of all, of course, I fully agree what Martin said, and this is must be a very strong governance system, but also stakeholder participations. On top of it, for example, if you look agriculture sector, there you have to be careful with monopolizing the system, because it's, as I said, common pool resource. It's very difficult to control access to water or limit if, in case some violations happen. But there are alternative opportunities, like delivering only service part of the job and keeping still infrastructure within hands of the governments, which can regulate and be, as I said, service controller on behalf of the water users. That's very important. Other thing is is that social part of it, that most of the time the prices in agriculture will be subsidized. So you have to find out the way to improve managing the subsidies, that they are smart, not just making, for example, private users unhappy with the system. So you have to really have institutions, rules, and legislation control, but also feedback system, which also includes vision from the stakeholders.
Thank you, Iskandar. So we move to the next question to Jigisha. So the case of Bui that you presented seems like a great example of adopting an integrated approach and planning at the watershed scale to promote improved urban water security. How replicable is Bui's experience to other cities when applying the toolkit that you presented? What are some of the enabling factors and challenges?
Thank you for that question. I think I'll start first with what are the enabling factors to implement this. One of the major enabling factors is the partnerships which we have seen between the local development sectors of the NGO and the existing development partners which are there, and the partnership between the local government with the local community. So So the partnership of all these together with the demonstration of projects has led towards that becomes the major enabling factor for implementation of this approach. The challenging part, however, becomes the onboarding the local government to adopt this approach and take these activities ahead. So that becomes one of the challenging areas. Apart from that, one of the enabling side which I would see is where we find the funders and donors to help implement or support implement these pilot demonstrations, which generally help creating awareness amongst the citizens. So then it pushes or leverages the citizens to adopt this approach and take it forward. Lang, if you can let me know the second question, please. I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Yes, so the second question is how replicable is the Bui's experience for other cities when applying the toolkit that you presented?
Okay, thank you. So I would say the toolkit is developed in a way that it has taken the learnings from the city as well as various existing toolkits which are already present in the market. So it is not like reinventing the wheel, but already there are a lot of things which are applicable and present in the market. But the toolkit has adopted the approaches which are practical and can be implemented in context of various cities. So based on different context of cities, the stakeholder, whoever is willing to adopt any particular approach, can use this as well as implement various aspects. So it is not necessary that the stakeholder who's using the toolkit goes from module 1 to module 5. If a person or if a stakeholder wants to adopt one single aspect of, for example, rainwater harvesting or groundwater recharge structure, which also helps the city to move towards water security, then they can so the toolkit is developed in such a way that it can be used individually for a particular project as well as an overall integrated approach for the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki-san. We have another question to the WSP team. How long did it take to create this website? Do you think how this educational tool can be more well-known and used by the Mekong citizen and beyond?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So producing this particular website took about 3 months. 4 people working on it, 1 on the research, 1 on the graphics and animation, 1 on the web development, and then piecing it all together, plus the coordination. And we believe that this could be very useful also on a smaller scale, targeted more on, well, specific topics or organizations. And we would be very keen to, for example, see a map like this for regional flywheel initiatives or for a small river and the communities along this river, and using that as a bit of an exchange and stakeholder platform as well to share both their stories through photography, videos, and articles, but also to really highlight the solutions or the projects that have worked to address some of the solutions that communities have faced. So yeah, we did, for context, we developed this platform together with an agency in Australia that also does science communication, and they have sourced articles from around the world from academics working on the Mekong, which you can access if you go to arteries.blue. And we would like to do something similar with someone that has worked specifically on projects and then really tell the stories of these projects.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so this question, I guess, to the whole panel. Do you think desalination has a greater role to play in Asia, especially in connection with hydrogen strategies? Is there anyone wants to give an answer to this question?
Let me try, because we have this region with a lot of water deficit. Indeed, desalination is a viable option if you are talking smaller and drinking water purposes or smaller household use purposes. However, I think if we are talking about the larger use, like several cubic kilometers of water for irrigation, I would say it would be a little limited. But this, we are talking about current technologies. Of course, technology is improving daily, and maybe in a few years we will have a large-scale desalination capacity. But at least in Central Asia, we are witnessing emerging trend to construct desalination plants to deliver drinking water and water for household uses. So that's a response from Central Asia.
Maybe on the hydrogen component, hydrogen is an energy storage potentially, but as a fuel for transport only if there is long distance hauling involved. And I'm not sure what the status of that is in different parts of Asia, but at least in Europe, for example, I mean, only long distance will be a viable alternative for hydrogen. Anything for passenger vehicle or for day-to-day transport is very likely to move to battery electric vehicles.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone wants to add view on this question about desalination?
I think the implied point really is understanding, the tension between water scarcity and carbon emissions and climate change. So, as we've heard from Iskander, it's a question of appropriate technology and thinking about those trade-offs, both from a carbon perspective, but also potential brine and salt pollution from desalination. There will be a role, but I think technology has the ability to minimize, in some ways, some of the environmental impacts from the current desalination. But it's a question of trade-offs and prioritization.
Thank you, Martin. We have another question to all speakers. Are you confident about shoring up the required finance to achieve SDG STIC targets by 2030? Anyone wants to share their view on it? I think we are very far behind, but
You're absolutely right. I think far behind. At least in Central Asia, we are looking at least access to clean drinking water and sanitation part, which is requires quite effort, especially sanitation. I think maybe current investments must be doubled or tripled for next maybe 5 years in order to at least to get close to the commitments. Regarding other part like integrated water resource management, which is also requires a lot of efforts, I would say that part is even more difficult than drinking water and wash. We have to have a sectoral cooperation, invest to the institutions, invest to capacities. In one word, I think we have to double and triple our efforts on this in order to reach SDG. At least I'm talking about the region where I'm from. Thank you.
thank you.
Perhaps the question could be turned around. We see water as a key economic enabler. Without appropriate water resilience, economies can't grow and prosper. So I think there's a question here that we need to understand how water can enable that and seen as an economic ingredient, if you like. And perhaps that might help change the conversation and narrative. I think what we see around the world is most areas, if not all, are suffering from a lack of investment, whether it be the global north or the global south. There is a lack of structural investment into water systems, and we need to have a different conversation around that investment as a means to develop resilience, but also economic growth and prosperity.
And on a note on narrative, Martin, I think it's also important to maybe change the perspective of what achieving SDG 6 means in the first place. Because if we take a broader approach and say, okay, the informal sector or informal markets can actually safely and affordably provide SDG 6 services, whatever that means, given the right regulation, I think we're maybe more ahead than we think we are based on the current JMP numbers, for example. But I think there's maybe a bit of redefining to be done as to what is actually included as safely and affordable water services and sanitation.
Yeah, great discussion. I think we have time for one more question. So to Dr. Abdullahi, what are the biggest barriers to private sector participation in Central Asia? How likely are these to change in the next 5 and 10 years?
Thank you. It's a very good question. I think it meant in water sector investment, which I was speaking. What I would say, one of the first issue or problem is very much legacy of past, means that agriculture, which consumes most of the water, is very much regulated. Even freer economies in the region, we have 5 countries, you see still a role of government is very, very solid and strong, which is in one hand is good as a social regulator, as I said, but in other hand, it makes a very, very, very small space for private engagement and investment. Second one is also the private investors themselves do not want to risk much because water sector is very risky sector, especially under the climate change. If you get engaged into water sector and invest, you have to share these risks with the public. Are you ready to risk? So that's the second point. And third one is regulations which are in paper is very, very irregularly implemented. So regularity of implementation of the legal system is very difficult. These are some points. And if I look forward 5 years, I am quite optimistic due to last reforms and changes happening in the sector. The major water user, which is Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, are taking some steps to reduce government's role in the agriculture. At least in Uzbekistan, we see that government withdraw from cropping regulations, letting more private business come into agriculture, which in also will consequently reduce role of regulation in water sector, which means the private sector come in and more play a role. So this is my feeling, but I hope I have a right feelings.
Yeah, thank you, Iskandar, to share your views. So I think at this point we can end the Q&A sessions. I think we have many good and interesting questions and a very fruitful discussion. Some of the key messages that I would like to highlight from this session, as I mentioned in my opening statement and throughout the presentation today, we can see the important role of engaging private sectors and other stakeholders in managing water resources sustainably. And to increase their participation, a single solution will not work, but an innovative, integrated approach that requires collaboration and engagement from demand to supply, from citizens to policymakers who can set an enabling environment for private sector investment in the water sector. And this can be done through institutional and regulation framework reform. And another aspect is to enhance knowledge sharing by investing more in innovative educational and knowledge products that can communicate complex issues to the wide audience, including private sectors, in a clear and easily understandable way. I would really like to thank all our speakers today for the great presentation and active discussion. I hope that some interesting ideas that we discussed today can be brought forward. Thank you once again. It was a great session, and it's the first session for today. We still have many interesting sessions coming up, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next one. So with that, I would like to close the session. Thank you and bye. Goodbye.